Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm Danny Hyong, your host. As you can see, I am joined today by Stanislav Karpovic, a former U.S. military officer, as well as a geopolitical commentator and analyst. Stars, it is wonderful to see you again. Having you on is always a distinct pleasure. Yes, everyone, please hit the like button as you enter the stream, because that assists in boosting this program within YouTube's algorithm. As we get started immediately here, Stars, I wanted to ask about the whiplash-inducing developments we are currently witnessing regarding Iran. It seems that Donald Trump has been experiencing significant difficulties, given that there have been discussions about potential talks that were scheduled to occur in Oman, then they were canceled, and now, apparently, they are back on. The Trump administration continues to issue threats, despite the fact that it has already called off 2 planned strikes. Now, it appears that while the U.S. is making demands on Iran to discuss its missile program, which Iran has not agreed to do, Israel and the U.S. are claiming they have agreed. Before I get your reaction, I wanted to show you that Iranian television broadcast a test of their new Khorramshahr 4 missile, confirming that it has now entered the mature stage of operational status. Operating from within the new missile cities of the Revolutionary Guard, it can travel at speeds up to Mach 16 and has a range of, I believe, somewhere around 2,000 kilometers. Stars, please discuss your reaction to what is transpiring with Iran, and also anything you wish to mention regarding Russia's role or China's role. First, perhaps, let's focus on Iran and what is occurring here, because it seems like Donald Trump is attempting to snatch victory from the jaws of a very chaotic defeat. Well, first of all, I believe that specific missile is strictly a ballistic missile and not actually a hypersonic missile. For those individuals who do not know the difference, a ballistic missile means it travels on a ballistic course, arching upwards and then coming down. Because it arches up and comes back down, if you calculate the vector and calculate the tipping point, you can basically determine its path. If you possess enough space and time, especially with a supercomputer to calculate its trajectory and landing zone, give or take weather factors like wind or air moisture, which can slow it down slightly due to atmospheric thickness, but more or less you know where it is coming. Therefore, you can send an anti-missile missile up there to try and pop something up in front of it, and that is essentially a ballistic missile. Ballistic missiles, when they are descending, will hit these incredible speeds of Mach 13, Mach 15, Mach 18, or whatever, which are normally considered hypersonic missile speeds. But they are not technically hypersonics because they are non-maneuverable. They follow a ballistic arc much like throwing a rock. If you throw it far enough up, it is going to come down, and it is always going to come down at an arc. Now, hypersonics are different, and that is the problem because they are maneuverable. You really cannot just throw up a missile in its path, no matter what the calculations are, because you do not know what its path is going to be. It just moves, shifting left a little, then up a little, down a little, and right a little, and the missile is constantly changing course. Or the glide vehicle is constantly changing course, as it is flying within that plasma envelope. Well, first of all, I am pretty convinced Trump is probably going to commence this war. Look, there are 2 additional aircraft carrier groups heading into the region. I think what they did previously is they tried to assassinate and decapitate the Iranian government during the spring or summer, which we witnessed during the 12-day war. That failed miserably because, amazingly, it is not just one man ruling the entire country, but rather a whole government structure. The West possesses this obsession that every problem has a name and a patronymic, to quote a Russian proverb, but the West genuinely believes this on a country-level setting, thinking that if we just eliminate this one person in this country, we will rule forever, or we will fracture them, or do whatever we desire with them. Every time, they are astonished when they realize there is an entire government organization, and somebody else just steps up and probably does the same thing as they were performing before. Amazingly, they think Rodriguez is now president of Venezuela. Oh wait, we got Maduro. No, you just have Maduro, that is it. You do not possess Venezuela. Their mentality was more or less that way. And with the Israelis, it was slightly broader than the typical American approach, but they liquidated a bunch of generals and liquidated a bunch of scientists. Scientists are more difficult to replace often enough, and even generals are challenging enough to replace as they are very talented. But in a military that is not operated by just one warlord screaming charge with everybody charging after him, you have an officer corps and you do not know about the next individual in line. He may be even more talented, he may be less, and he may be significantly more aggressive because he desires revenge, especially if he loved his leader and held a lot of respect for him, and you just killed him off. So now it is vengeance time. You do not know that, but the U.S. harbors a tendency to want to decapitate because they think they just need to get rid of one individual or just one layer, and that is it, and we have won. Well, Iran demonstrated to them that no, you did not win. So they reverted to this approach, except this time they attempted to execute a color revolution. So there were actual legal protests, and the protests, by the way, were occurring because of what the U.S. did to the Iranian economy. All this time, I have been sitting here attempting to figure out why Bassett is in the position that he holds, because if you ever listen to him speak about economics, he is a lightweight. He knows nothing regarding economics. He opens his mouth and foolish things come piling out when he gets into a tizzy because somebody is pressing some questions on him regarding economics and government and everything. Except finance, he just does not know how to answer and is just battling around for something. It is the approach from Bassett of throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. But what is Bassett skilled at? Bassett is Soros's right-hand man, or former Soros right-hand man, by the way. When Trump goes around declaring he is against Soros, well, right you are. Yeah, you have Soros's right-hand man, the individual who crashed the pound sterling. That is what he is skilled at. He is skilled at crashing economies as a hedge fund investor in currencies. Anyway, for Soros, he was the guy that crashed the pound sterling. So here you go. This is what his paramount goal was, to crash the Iranian economy by crashing the currency, and he basically accomplished that. So people came out because, yes, inflation is high, people are experiencing a hard time, and they are experiencing a hard time because the U.S. will not leave them alone for obvious reasons. Well, those demonstrations were legal and they were not suppressed. The problem is that the West utilizes these kinds of demonstrations by trying to get regular people out as cover to insert their radicals into positions. This is a standard color revolution playbook, which is what we observed happen in Ukraine, and we observed this happen in many other countries. They mobilize the regular people out there for some factual grievance. It may be an inflated grievance, but it is a real grievance. But infiltrating through are these radical groups that are then going to take over this protest and then turn it violent. And they make it very violent, as we have witnessed. I was speaking to Professor Morandi, and he was discussing somehow there were like 500 or 600 individuals that were killed. They were burning police cars and emergency vehicles, including ambulances, so they could not get personnel in there to save people or extinguish fires that they were setting. They were killing people and incinerating medical facilities. I mean, there were videos that were emerging showing them entering mosques and entering churches. Yeah, by the way, for all those who do not comprehend it, there are several dozen churches in Tehran. Yeah, believe it or not. In fact, near the metro station underneath the main Armenian church is the metro station of the Virgin Mary. I mean, I have never been there, unfortunately. I really desire to go, but I have viewed the photographs of this new station and it is entirely Christian iconography. Wow! For all those individuals that think the religious leaders just kill everybody and there is no freedom, yeah. By the way, here is another mind-bender. There are synagogues in Tehran and there are Jews in the Iranian army, and officers even, and in parliament too. Wow. I know it is mind-boggling for everybody that is in the MAGA crowd, and everybody gets misled by the idea of those evil Iranian leaders who have killed everybody and suppressed everything. Yeah, and apparently, well, they didn't. And there are even Zoroastrians who are not considered people of the book, which is considered a pagan religion, but they are permitted to practice their religion, and they even possess a member of parliament. Wow. Yeah, I am being sarcastic, I know, but so you possess this broad-range society that supports the government for obvious reasons, because the government is not. I mean, it is an autocratic government. It is a republic, first of all. Let's commence with that. And it does possess a religious top on it, the Ayatollah. But this is not autocratic in that it does possess a tendency of being power-centric. But this is not a government that suppresses the people and whips them and beats them, and they are all just waiting to overthrow the government, which are the falsehoods that the US believes or Trump believes. This is what his interventionists, also known as the Israelis and their political Zionists, if I can call them that, so they are not genuinely very religious Jews, and the Christian Zionists, if we can call them that, because they are not very Christian, are conveying to him. So let's go. We will initiate this revolution, and they got it all proceeding with different ethnic groups, trying radicals from different ethnic groups. And then Russia and China intervened, and they blocked Starlink, and they did worse than block Starlink. They were able to pinpoint the receivers of Starlink. They didn't jam them. They allowed them to operate right up to the point that the security services came in and swooped them up so they didn't escape, and they are still at their Starlink terminals. They collected up about 5,600 of these leaders who were organizing these radical movements. And you watch this. The videos are emerging. You know they are murdering people. They are setting police on fire, literally. They are entering mosques and entering churches, destroying them and vandalizing them. I mean, these individuals are there to attempt to collapse the government from the inside, and they were the Mossad, the CIA, MI6 personnel, and they failed. I am not going to state there aren't additional agents. I am sure there are additional agents. I am sure they didn't activate everybody they possessed, and they still hold backups, but they failed. So what is Plan C now? We tried Plan A. We tried Plan B, actually. We tried Plan A, and Plan B was summer, but Plan C was the color revolution, and that didn't function. So what is Plan D? Oh, let's devastate the country. We are no longer attempting to just hurt the country or eliminate the leadership. We are just going to inflict massive damage to the infrastructure. That seems to be the American objective in this. And for that, they don't possess the infrastructure. They don't possess the combat systems in place yet. They don't. They hold one carrier group, and they hold a lot of Air Force assets which could have still performed a lot of damage. But now there are S-400 systems in there. And Russia established an integrated anti-air system, an air defense system, and what integrated signifies is it is on multiple levels. So you possess a strategic level where at least the radars can intercept and detect what is inbound well before it enters your airspace and maybe engage it while it is over somebody else's airspace. Then you possess theater-level assets that are, instead of attempting to cover most of the country, now covering only specific approaches of the country. You possess basically a localized system, and then you possess spot defense. Localized would be the Panzer systems that hold rockets and autocannons, and the spot defense is a fellow with a missile on the shoulder attempting to take down whatever is inbound. So you hold a multiple integrated system, but the principal part of it isn't just that the vehicles are there, the entire system is communicating with each other. You know, if on a strategic level it intercepted a certain quantity, whatever passed through, the information is passing on to the next level, and the next level. So they each in turn engage in foiling whatever enemy is inbound, whatever threat is inbound, and hopefully destroy all of it before it inflicts any real damage. So that is an integrated system, and Iran did not possess an advanced integrated system. But Russia is the master of integrated systems. It possesses one now. Well, as far as I know, it possesses one now. I mean, Russia has been laboring on it very hard, and the Chinese have been importing equipment and laboring on it very hard. So a lot of the Chinese and Russian systems are compatible, so they can function together. This is opposed to, say, in Ukraine, where the Ukrainians acquired all kinds of systems from different countries, and maybe they all utilize Patriots because America pushes them onto all Patriots. But a lot of their other systems are distinct, and they are not that well integrated. So attempting to integrate all of this in a patchworked area becomes very difficult. Well, here you hold systems that are compatible, and they are being integrated specifically. So I think at this point they have realized that. Plus the fact that I don't know if it is accurate or not, but I have been told a figure of 3,000 missiles a month is what Iran is assembling, short and medium-range ballistic missiles, which are sufficient to strike Israel, and the short missiles to strike everything around it that is American. The U.S. is evacuating certain bases because there are 56,000 American troops, not counting the carrier groups, that are within striking range of short and medium ballistic missiles and drones around Iran. We are discussing the Persian Gulf. We are discussing in Iraq. We are discussing in Syria. And the other thing is the militias. Basically, the government forces in Iraq are Shia, and they are prepared to fight. And they did not forget Soleimani's assassination in Iraq, where there were also there was an Iraqi general that was killed, and there was a number of other Iraqi officials that were killed along with Soleimani. They possess, and Soleimani was their guest. You know, you kill my guest, I am honor-bound to kill you. That is how the system functions, and the U.S. killed the guest. So they have not forgotten that either. So the Americans that are located there in that green fortress of solitude, that is the U.S. Green Zone, the U.S. Embassy, which is a fortress. Yeah, they are going to be in for a substantial challenge when this commences. They are going to be in for a real substantial challenge. So I think the U.S. understands all that, at least to a degree. So they are attempting to bring in more and more assets from what I have heard. There are 2 additional carrier groups moving in. One of them may just stick to the Mediterranean. But what do you do in the interim? Let's hold talks. Sure, that is a Trump approach. That is the Israeli approach. Let's hold talks. The talks are not going to progress anywhere. The talks exist to deceive the enemy into some kind of sensation of, oh, we can talk our way through this and figure this out, while the other fellow is preparing to strike and saying, yeah, keep talking, and raise your head a little higher, yes, I can reach your throat a little better. And that is the American approach. I mean reality speaking. And this isn't just Trump. No, we can go backward. Look, if you examine some of the records of the Pilgrims, I am going to go really backward for American history, pre-U.S. formation, yes, but you know there is a Russian proverb. A people that don't know their history is like a child that doesn't know its mother. We are all hostages of our culture, and our culture is constructed by our history. Like it or not, it is present. I mean, you can attempt to break free of it if you understand what it is, but everybody is influenced because that is the culture that builds up from the historical events. You know, there is an account of the Pilgrims where they invited one of the native tribes to a feast and then poisoned all of them, like killed 300 of them because these are non-humans. They are not real human beings. They are devils. So they killed 300 people that they invited as, you know, there is guest law. If you invite somebody to your house, you will die to defend them because they are your guest. Here, they just murdered them, stab in the back. And if you look at British history and Scottish history and a lot of others, there are a lot of incidents of weddings. You know, correct, the Game of Thrones, the Red Wedding. It is when he was constructing those books, he was utilizing historical events that he based as a foundation for all this. And there were like 5 or 6 of these massacres between the 1400s and the 1700s in England and Scotland at weddings. You know, you invite the other party, we are going to hold a wedding, and you kill them. It is something you don't normally do, but it occurs. So this is a historical thing that the West has performed and performs. The U.S. has performed it quite a few times, and I mean and I know I went deep in, but it occurs. You are looking at from the times of the first Pilgrims coming up. Historically, this has occurred a lot of times. Look at Milosevic. While they were negotiating with Milosevic, the Serbs were prepared to sign, then Holbrooke inserted certain additional agreements in there, or demands, I apologize, that the Serbs would never sign, and then they attempted to assassinate Milosevic. They struck his villa. Trump may not desire to admit it, or maybe Trump didn't even know it. But the West, that is America and its proxies, attempted to assassinate Vladimir Putin, and apparently there were some of his grandchildren present. This is not something the West is not renowned for. It is something the West is very renowned for. Very. So again, while we are moving forces in, let's hold a talk, and if we can induce you to disarm, we will just kill you faster. You know, it will be less painful, or we will kill at least for us anyways, and that is what we are witnessing now when they are discussing, you must get rid of your ballistic program. Why would you disarm with these kinds of individuals around? They don't convey that to North Korea. Why? Because North Korea can reach out. At least maybe not the US, but it can damn well strike Japan and South Korea with nuclear weapons. Oh, okay, well, it is a whole different conversation now because we are kind of afraid of them. Maybe they are insane, maybe they are not insane, but they possess nuclear weapons. That is a signal, by the way. The entire world is watching right now Trump walking away from START, permitting START to expire, the last. America has walked away from every single agreement it has signed. Let's commence with that. Well, but stars, I am hearing there is a handshake that is going to maintain it together. That is what Axios is stating. They are negotiating, and right now there is a handshake. It is going to continue. And it is like everything you just stated, stars, doesn't give me much confidence in the US. Well, even with START, I know we are diverging from that topic, but START is a very good point. Trump, by the way, from his first term, he desired out of START because, well, he didn't desire out. He desired the Chinese in. But his approach was, Russia, you must bring the Chinese to a table and compel them to negotiate and sign this like. And the Russian side was like, why? We don't possess a problem with Chinese nuclear weapons. They possess a problem with Russian nuclear weapons. You possess a problem with Chinese nuclear weapons, you go talk to the Chinese and sign a separate agreement with them. Trump stated, oh no, we must have it all under one agreement, while the Russian side is like, well, that is your problem, you go talk to the Chinese. So Trump has now permitted this to expire in a hope of having a three-way. God, that sounds like Epstein Island, something we are going to have a three-way now, a multinational three-way. By the way, but the British and the French aren't invited. They get to keep whatever weapons they possess how they desire it because they are America's vassals. So everybody is watching, and under logical circumstances, Iran would have developed nuclear weapons by now. If I was in their shoes, I would have developed nuclear weapons by now. They possess a religious edict that nuclear weapons are a great evil, just like the Taliban possesses a religious edict that narcotics are a great evil, and they burned all the opium fields. They may possess a different religious view from you, but you must understand their edicts too. If they desired to, they would have already developed nuclear weapons, Iran. But the religious leaders stated, no, this is evil, and we are not going to proceed down that road. So they haven't proceeded down that road, but they can still enrich uranium. It is being utilized as the big boogeyman, like, Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. You know how many they discovered there? They are just carting them out endlessly. There are so many of them there. So that is the US. I think there is going to be a war, unfortunately. Now, what can Iran do? It can perform a lot of damage to the US. It can kill the US economy, or definitely kill the European economy. Yeah, Stas, now that we have established that this war is approaching, it is just a matter of time, maybe we can discuss the kind of preparations being made. We know what the US is performing. We know that there is a major buildup, and it is still proceeding despite the talks of talks. And Iran has also stated that it is very much prepared, that it had long since the 12-day war shifted its military preparedness from defensive to offensive, and that it possesses, the UAE and Israel and everywhere around it very much marked out and targeted. And we have observed actually Chinese satellite imagery kind of provide free target practice for Iran should a war commence. So I am curious, how do you perceive this proceeding? Because the Trump administration not too long ago approved of an F-35 to strike down an Iranian drone that was flying supposedly too close to the USS Abraham Lincoln. But a lot of people have mentioned that needing to send out an F-35 fighter jet to take care of a single drone is maybe a bad omen. What do you state about what is to come? Oh, they desire to show off the plane, and they possess a couple extra $1 million to spend on having it actually lift off the ground. These are the most expensive flying junk machines that I think mankind has ever constructed. So they talk about doom, boom goggle. I don't think it is accurate, but I have heard upwards of $2 trillion per plane for its lifespan. I don't think that is accurate. Maybe 100 billion, definitely. Because you must figure how much it is going to actually cost down the line and keeping the thing operational. It is such a money waste that there are actual subsections of these planes, like the hydraulic, certain hydraulic sections and avionics, that military mechanics are not permitted to touch by contract. Only the manufacturer gets to bring in the $400 and $500 an hour technicians to touch those parts. Show us on the model where the bad man touched you. This is the kind of concept here. So this is a massive moneymaker for the military-industrial sector in the US, producing a machine that kind of supposed to perform everything. It can't perform anything correctly on a big scale. And stealth is not very good against modern systems. Modern integrated air defense systems, they kind of locate it pretty easily if they are modern, and they possess the computer capacity to locate it. You look at the void or you look at the very small object that is flying very quickly in your direction. So that there's drones. The Iran's taken down a considerable number of the Raptor drones, and God only knows how many drones the Houthis really took down. That's not that big of a scary thing. But from the Iranian side, Iran held back on the 12-day war. It really held back. They could have sent 2-3 times as many missiles incoming, and in 12 days, the reason the US had to find some kind of way, we'll just perform a couple of hits in the desert, but we know we're not blowing anything up that's 20 stories underground or 10 stories underground with multiple entrances and exits, and then we'll permit the Iranians shoot a couple missiles that didn't perform much damage either to save face, and we'll state end of the day. The reason the US did that is they ran out of anti-air missiles. They were very, very close to running out. The Iron Dome was pretty screwed. Aero system was pretty much out of missiles also. Now what do? And the Iranians still possess tons of missiles left to fire. So they deceived the Iranians in, let's make peace, basically. We'll end this, and so on and so on. Now, Iran took a lot of civilian casualties, they did. And that was because of the surprise attacks, because the Israelis were shooting up entire apartment buildings to kill one guy. They're getting his family and every family around them. They were just, to them everybody is. It's not collateral damage, it's a bonus prize. How many civilians did you kill? Woo, here you get another star. This isn't something to be avoided. This is something to be magnified as much as possible. And the US possesses the same approach to civilian casualties if we're going to be blatantly honest about it. Just examine Mosul that the US liberated from ISIL, that US also created and helped fund. They basically destroyed Mosul, slaughtered half the population in the city, drove in there, placed a flag, and stated it's liberated. There was a solid, undamaged building in the entire city, and for like 6 months they were extracting corpses of civilians from the rubble. So that there is no real collateral damage, it's just extra bonus points. Let's see how many people we kill. Sorting up a bit, can you hear me? But that's the reality of how... Stas, I might have to, hold on, let's reset a bit here. Yeah, your connection has broken up a bit, so I can now see you and hear you, but there is a significant lag. Okay, maybe give a test. I don't know if you desire to, I don't know if there is anything you can perform on your end. I think my end is okay. Let me attempt problem. If it's operating okay, it won't perform anything. I have got VPN on, but I need VPN to come into StreamYard, but I can usually switch the VPN off after I am in, but if it's operating all right now. You seem okay now. So you desire to finish your... I am never okay, I am always a little bit off. It's the extra caffeine, the occasional a couple hits on the head, but I should have a job. So, the U.S. Air Force, they incinerated to death everybody. Dresden. But the U.S. Air Force burned every single German city. I did a dissertation on the terror firebombings when I was in university, obtained a C. It was a major that gave me the topic. I didn't know anything about it, but as a cadet I went and studied, pulled out all the books I could find, or a lot. He didn't like my conclusion that basically US and the UK were committing a war crime on the Germans, so I obtained a C grade not because I call it a paper and citations, but because of my analysis and conclusion. And they'll perform the same thing to Iran if they can, if you provide them a chance. So with the integrated air defense system, A lot of the heavy bombers aren't going to be able to come in. You know, the B-52s aren't going to be able to perform carpet bombing. They'll be destroyed. And as far as the American carrier groups, it's a lot of people. Oh, they'll be out in the Indian Ocean, they'll be too distant for, or they'll be difficult to locate. Well, there's two buts here. One, if they're out of medium-range missile range, they can't really conduct operations, because those planes will be bingo fuel before they get to their missile launch zones. So they'll have to bring in a lot of fuelers, which makes it very difficult to continue performing continuous operations because you have to refuel the planes en route, otherwise they don't return home. So already you possess a range, maximum range how distant they can go away from the edge of Iran. Or if you're attempting to strike in Iran deeper, you know that signifies they must be closer up. So Iran got one problem. The second problem is, as you mentioned, but it's not just Chinese. Russia possesses about almost 100 satellites floating around, military satellites between the Chinese and Russia. That entire area possesses live coverage constantly, targeting data. In fact, Russia's given Iran a lot of targeting data is for the surrounding areas live, up-to-date photos. And it's plausible deniability. Prove that we provided them targeting data on your aircraft carriers. It's just sheer luck. They just happen to be flying in that direction. I mean, consider it with an aircraft carrier. You don't have to sink it. You just have to damage the tarmac. You damage a tarmac enough, that's it. It's a useless object. You have to get it out of there because planes can't take off. Planes can't land. It's just a sitting target. And okay, 3 aircraft carriers could be converted into 3 sitting targets. Iran, if Iran saturates a carrier battle group with 7,800 missiles, they will get through. Neither Phalanx nor the anti-aircraft systems in that battle group are going to be able to take out that many targets. They won't. They can't. They don't possess enough missiles. And when their missiles run out, because the U.S. lacks adequate tenders, tender in this case signifies ships that resupply the combat vessels. You know your logistics. They have to return to port to get resupply, and their number 1 port in the area all happen to be in the Persian Gulf. So they can't proceed that way, so they have to proceed somewhere else to get resupply. Diego Garcia, they could proceed there, I guess, but that's a pretty long steam away and then turn around steam back. Meanwhile, Iran can saturate Israel. Iran can saturate everything around there with missiles and with up-to-date targeting systems incoming, information incoming from Russian and Chinese satellites. And you destroy, even if you destroy the Iranian or damage the Iranian food distribution system, Russia's just up the Caspian. Russia feeds 1/3 of the world. Guess what? Russia isn't going to permit Iran starve. There will be plenty of Russian ships bringing grain and whatever else needs to be brought in. On a day or two, steam from Astrakhan down to the Iranian ports. So Iran's got a deep logistics base. It's called Russia just north of it. Azerbaijan can be activated by the Americans, and it probably will be. Azerbaijan possesses both an American and an Israeli base on it. But if Azerbaijan overplays its cards, there won't be an Azerbaijan because it's sandwiched directly between Iran and Russia and has pissed off everybody. So how far do you desire to push this? You desire to be Ukraine 2.0 on a much smaller scale from 2 sides with 2 big nations. Okay, well, if that's the game you desire to play, you pick up your cards where they fall, and it's going to be very big fall for Azerbaijan if they perform that. So Iran possesses a very deep supply line. It's called Russia. If need be, it's also called China. So I think it's going to be a very difficult egg to crack. I am not stating the Americans aren't going to perform it because the Pentagon, and particularly the White House, they perform stupid things all the time they're the underpants gnomes from South Park. Step 1, we steal the underpants. Step 2, step 3, we make profits. There is no step 2. We have no figured out what we're going to perform there. There was a Far Side cartoon from many, many, many years ago. This physicist got a whole board of computations, and then plus a miracle happens equals the answer. And this is what I mean. We observe this in Venezuela. Okay, we grab Maduro. No, we own the government. Well, no, actually, you don't own anything. You just possess Maduro. They never took it to step 2. Now what? Step 3? Now what? And you could see they're running around attempting to figure out, okay, Maduro we got, now what do we perform? Okay, we possess no idea what to perform. And I think they're more or less the same level on Iran. They don't. Outside of commencing hostilities, I don't know what they possess planned. I don't know if they possess anything planned. Let's just bomb away and see what happens. Yeah, well, that's what it feels like, stars. And it seems like, when the Ukraine conflict emerged in 2022, I do think that there were a lot of people in Washington, a lot of establishment warmongers in Washington and NATO broadly, who thought that the combination of economic sanctions and dragging Russia into a conflict would immediately cause a governmental collapse. It would cause regime change. Of course, we're in 2026 now, and there is nothing of the sort that is approaching. Iran seems to be not. Of course, the context is different. Events look much different in many important ways. But now we observe, I think, a more united Iran. And we also observe what you have already described, the color revolution, the proxy war that was very violent and murderous, that was crushed and that failed. And now you possess a more united Iran. And we already observe Trump having a lot of trouble greenlighting an immediate action, because an immediate action would likely garner probably worse results than what we observed in Venezuela, because Iran would strike back immediately and Venezuela can't. So that seems to be a big difference here. What do you make of, Russia stated that they are not indifferent of the events that are happening to Iran right now. China just had a conversation with Trump where Trump himself stated they spoke a lot about Iran. Many people are very suspicious of Russian and Chinese support to Iran as being effective. What do you state to this? Well, they better be suspicious of being effective. It is effective. It will be effective. In the 12-day war, what the biggest advantage the West held, or in this case the US and Israel, was Iran's foreign policy, and such was being operated by liberals. They're no longer there. They desire to be loved by the West. They got a lot of loving from the West, particular for America and Israel. Those people are no longer in charge. They failed miserably. This, and what do I mean by that? Russia proposed to Iran before that an ironclad defensive treaty, the same thing Russia possesses with North Korea, that stated, hey, you get attacked, we come to your aid. We get attacked, you come to our aid. The North. That's why North Koreans were more than happy to send troops to Kursk. They fought in Kursk because that's absolutely Russian territory. That's not even disputable. But the Iranian liberals, they watered down the wording to basically, I'm paraphrasing because it's been half a year since I read the agreement, that we will struggle together against common regional threats, which signifies nothing. It signifies absolutely nothing. It doesn't state anything there. That's not something you can build any kind of defensive policy on. It's quicksand, basically. I mean, it's not even that. And worse yet, Russia ratified Putin signed. The Russian Duma ratified that right off the bat. The Iranians only signed it on the second day of the 12-day war, after the assassinations and everything else, the attempted decapitation strikes. Now it's gotten much more serious. So to Russia and to a smaller, well, maybe not even a smaller extent for China, Iran falling, being destroyed, government being replaced, or Iran being as a country liquidated into small states is an existential crisis, a little less than Ukraine, because Iran is part of that wall that blocks the West from fully setting fire to the Caucasus, from entering Central Asia and setting fire to Central Asia, which, Kazakhstan itself possesses a 3,000-kilometer border with Russia. And there's a lot of Russians down in there, about a third of the population of Kazakhstan, just to mention one of that, where the US already attempted a color revolution with Islamic jihadists back in 2021. So I forgive that. So yeah, Russia sees the writing on the wall. Iran cannot be permitted to fall, period. And the Chinese aren't far behind on that because they observe the same thing. They don't need Islamic jihadists running around in Central Asia with the CIA training and backing and everything else, because that's going to affect Western China. They all quite well understand it. Plus, the Chinese desire those areas for the Belt and Road Initiative. And since the US possesses absolutely nothing civilizationally to offer any other nation except vassalhood and maybe getting a piece of somebody else's plunder before we plunder you yourselves, aka the Europeans. And while China and Russia are offering a civilization idea of traditional values, your own culture, and economic development without internally messing with your society. You know, whatever government your people support or whatever government is there, it's your problem, not our problem. Let's develop economically. That's the approach that Russia and China possesses as opposed to the US, where we're going to force our view and vassalhood on you if we need to, we'll overthrow your government. And by the way, when the US goes, because we desire to, we love liberal democracy, no, they don't. They love dictatorship. Dictators are easy to control. Dictators are easy to buy. The US establishes dictatorships. They may provide them a mantle of liberal democracy, but they're no democracies. They're no republics. So let me commence that. They're not even monarchies except for very rare instances like what they desire to perform in Iran, because the fellow that they desire to put in Iran is an absolute American asset. You know, he's absolutely owned in by the US because monarchs also tend to start looking nationalistically and going, that's also ours, why the hell are you taking everything? They don't like those kinds of governments. Republics, monarchies. They all start to look at things and go, well, that's really ours. Why are you actually, stealing our resources? Dictatorships is stick a fellow in there that possesses no legitimate right to rule because, like Zelensky, he's desperate and he's absolutely dependent on you and the people don't like him. That's easy to control because, if we stop control, if you stop providing us our bribes or the money or takebacks or resources, we won't support you and you'll die and your family will die and your fortunes will go away real quick. So these types of people are absolutely beholden to the US, and that's the type of people the US absolutely loves to put in power. It has been performing it for quite a long time. For example, they look at Greece, they overthrew the king of Greece, and they placed in what they placed in the regime of the colonels, and the regime of the colonels was a despotic regime that was absolutely under control of the US. And they've performed this in many countries. It doesn't have to just be in the Middle East. So yeah, that's the type of government that they desire to put in there because that's the kind of government they can control. Neither China nor Russia desires anything to perform like that. They don't need another Zelensky sitting in Iran, and it's an absolutely existential crisis because things are difficult enough in Central Asia with American limited influence. Now imagine an open highway bringing in as much as you desire, whoever you desire, Israel running all over the place with American bases training him up and so on like they did in Syria, right? The difference with Venezuela, I was going to just state really quick. Stars and a big concern would be whatever forces are empowered there, as you stated, the Caucasus would be wide open, and flood through Central Asia and then into possibly Russia and then possibly farther east. I think that's a big concern. The problem with Venezuela, they don't possess a deep like Russia and China. Iran does possess a deep rear. Their best deep rear is Colombia and Brazil. Colombia and Brazil, I don't know how much they're willing to. There's plenty of Colombians that will take a whack at the gringo. I'm not sure how much Brazil can go with proxy. But for Russia and China to proxy in Venezuela, it's pretty difficult. It is the other side of the world. There is the US Navy out there, and it's not something, you come in on the West Coast. Yeah, well, Venezuela doesn't possess anything on the West Coast. It's all strictly Caribbean. You can't. It's hard to sneak stuff in. Sure, you can get some submarines in there sneaking equipment in, but it's not enough to uphold an entire war. It's difficult. On the other hand, Iran possesses a deep rear. Anything it needs, fuel oil, pro-diesel, Russia will ship that in, China will ship that in. Electronics, missile systems, they will bring that in. And if you strike a Russian tanker coming in with a Russian flag, you've just declared war on Russia, the stick of a doubt coming down the gas. So that makes things much more difficult. And again, I haven't even stated what happens if the Straits of Hormuz are closed, and they will be closed. Yeah, it's a big deal. Should we proceed on that one issue? Yeah, please. I think it's good to remember because it does possess a lot to do also with Russia and China and the. I think we're witnessing in this shifting world, Iran's having this trump card, it seems to be worrying. I mean, China has talked about concerns about navigation and all that with the Strait of Hormuz, but it seems to be worrying the US quite a bit more. We even observe Donald Trump almost like watching the oil markets as he performs moves against Iran, but please your assessment of this. Well, for your American audience, how would you like to possess $8 to $10 a gallon gasoline? And for your European audience, how would you like to possess no gasoline period at any cost? Welcome to the life of the Straits of Hormuz. Look, 38% of somewhere between 35 and 38% of world oil that proceeds on export market passes through the Straits of Hormuz. Whether it's some of it is Iranian, of course the majority is from the different Persian Gulf kingdoms and or republics, they all proceed through the Straits of Hormuz. The Straits of Hormuz are narrow. They are not that deep. They are overwatched by mountains full of natural and man-made caverns that can house land-to-ship missiles. That's 1, 2, you can mine them. 3, you can scuttle ships. You don't have to wait for somebody to come by and attempt to sink their ship. You just bring a bunch of yachts or a bunch of cutters out there and you scuttle them all up and down the Straits of Hormuz, and guess what? Nothing gets through. That's it. You've closed it off. Now let's fade. Let's speed forward. Now I'm not going to state it's going to strike $300 or $350 or something like that, but very easily $150 to $200 a barrel oil. But that's not the big problem. It's not the cost, and by the way, the US, it's the lack of supply. The oil markets are very finely tuned supply and demand. Supply sometimes a little higher, demands a little higher, depends on the economic cycle too. You know, if you possess recession, demand drops like a global recession, and then they cut down the amount that they can pump out. But again, somewhere between 35 and 38% of the oil passes, no matter how much they're pumping, it passes through the Straits of Hormuz. The straits are closed. It's not passing anywhere. So here comes the problem. Yeah, the US more or less can supply its own oil. It's still a net importer, but it can still supply its own oil, even counting the fact that US oil pumping has been steadily declining over the last 3 years. It looks like it's going to continue to climb. But all that aside, the problem is, even if the US possesses enough oil, the market functions are the market functions, and the price of that oil is going to get very expensive. So the gasoline or the is going to get very expensive. Now the US government can come in there and either nationalize the oil companies or force a ceiling on their costs. Yeah. So the US will take a strike, but it may not be a terminal strike. But here's the other problem. The Europeans are screwed as screwed gets. Because here's the reality of it. You take 36% of the world's oil off the market. It doesn't matter what cost it's at, there's physically not enough oil to feed the world at this point. You start burning through your reserves, and if this conflict or the closure proceeds more in a couple months, you really start burning through your reserves, possibly depending on which country they may not possess any reserves or enough reserves, and now you're just flat out of oil. And that's not just going to be in Europe, it's going to be striking other countries. Now, Russia can supply, obviously. Russia can supply India and China. There are other countries that are still pumping and can supply Southeast Asia, some internally, some externally, and so on. So there will be some countries with oil, but the European Union is just absolutely screwed. It is as screwed gets. Because why? Because they cut all ties to Russia. Because they get a lot of their, by the way, LNG now proceeds. They are planning on cutting out all Russian LG, so they possess American LG. But their second biggest supplier is Qatari LNG, and that's not piped, obviously. That proceeds through the same Straits of Hormuz. And we're back to the same issue. And you could possibly look at the total crash of the European Union in this one move, because they will possess an economic collapse. Prices are going to skyrocket. Will that lead to a social collapse? More than likely, at least in a few of those countries, absolutely. Is Russia going to be running to save them? I'm betting not at this point. Not at this point. Yeah, enjoy the... You know, there's a Russian saying, be careful who you dig the holes for, you may be falling them yourself. So the European Union's got to be screwed, totally screwed. The US will suffer, and it's not in Russia's interest either to possess the oil go too high, because that will cause a worldwide recession and it will strike Russia. It will strike China, obviously, so that's not good. But if the US performs this and the US is going to be massively screwed, you know Trump is going to have to send out troops in every city to cancel elections, because the midterm elections are going to be a mass slaughter for the Republicans if this happens, because the US economy is going to be taking a battering from your direction, the EU is going to be dead in the water, and here comes elections. So yeah, do you desire to play that game? But the interventions, neo-libs, they all desire to play that game, as they are the people that provided us Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Yugoslavia. These people that have failed everywhere, has a single one of them ever gone to jail? Has a single general ever been fired in the US since for the last 40 years? No. They fail upwards, they get more famous and richer. So why not possess another one? And there's the problem, and there's the gist of the problem. Yeah, well, Stas, as we conclude the hour, I wanted to ask you one final question, and I've been thinking about this a lot on two different fronts here. We possess, as you stated, the United States, establishment. They are more than happy to perform very stupid things in order to pursue these interests, especially when it comes to regime change on Iran. But even we're witnessing, and I just desire to pull this up, we're witnessing, this is in War on the Rocks, which is a very notorious, as you probably already know, neocon institution, media institution, and talking about, the recent Putin-China call, Putin-Xi call, and talk about how Russia is returning to vassalship. But that's not the most interesting thing about this. This is written by a U.S. military officer, by the way. This U.S. military officer states that the United States, the really dangerous thing for the Trump administration right now, is performing any kind of hedging with Russia and China, because the key problem is that it's not viable unless a suitable regime comes to Russia with converging interests. There's obviously even stars to this day. Despite what's happening in Ukraine, there's still fantasies of a regime changing Russia, let alone Iran. And then that gets me to this point. I wanted your comment on a lot of people who watch this show have been mentioning how in March of 2025, the United States went on an absolute blitzkrieg bombing campaign of Yemen. And Ansarullah's response caused 2 Super Hornet jets to fall into the sea because of intense maneuvers from Ansarullah Houthi missiles. So a lot of people are wondering, is all of this bluster really only leading to all kinds of disasters? You mentioned the economic one now, even maybe a military one, because of what we are witnessing coming out of the brass and the leadership of the United States, and what that really reflects. What's your final thoughts on this? Well, if there was ever two periods that Russia was a vassal, it was the Mongol Empire, which later became Mongol the Golden Horde, the Western Empire, that pretty much so ended in the late 1400s. It only lasted about 200 years. And then we conquered all of them, take a lesson right off from that, and then the 90s, I'd probably say the 90s under Yeltsin. But the problem here with Russia and China for the US, first of all, the worst case scenario for America, it was a tight relationship between Russia and China. So what did the US perform everything to make sure that was going to happen? It's like having a plaque on your table, the beatings will continue until morale improves, It's the same thing here, we're just going to beat you both, and don't you dare get to be friends with each other. You should be enemies. That's what we're beating you, to be enemies with each other. And the US is so freaking mentally obtuse, the Congress critters and a lot of these senior military officials that are not exactly they're not chosen for their brain power, they're chosen for their yes-manship, and ours guessing. In other words, they are totally irrational people living in their own little hellscape. Here's the other problem. People tend to project their own values onto other people, and this is an exact projection of the U.S. values. The U.S. does not possess allies. The U.S. does not possess friends. The U.S. possesses one of three categories with any other nation: vassal, enemy, or potential vassal. That's it, Britain, Germany. All these countries are not American allies. They are vassals. They get called allies, but half of them are occupied by the U.S. military. In one degree or another, they're all vassals. There's they're basically small sultanates under the rule of the big sultan. That's all we see there. So the US cannot understand. They can't understand BRICS. They can't understand a Russian-Chinese relationship of two equals. Even if, hey, China does possess the bigger manufacturing base, Russia possesses the bigger scientific base and military base, and they too, and Russia, by the way, is a huge manufacturing base too. Something the US still can't stereotype its way into recognizing its way into recognizing. So they can't understand this. They're incapable of understanding this, unfortunate, because the world would be a much safer place if they could understand this. So they've been playing this off, and another reason they perform this, and you see it on and off every couple months, you'll see a bunch of American and British articles like this, that Russia is now the vassal of China. Because they're attempting to trip Russian nationalism, national hubris that, oh, we can't be somebody's vassals, we the Americans are right. We have to possess a horrible relationship with the Chinese while the Americans are attempting to cut our throats, because otherwise we'll be vast to China, and nobody's buying that. Maybe some extreme fringe might, 0.5% minority might be buying this, but nobody's buying this in Russia reality. They're telling you, oh yeah, they're vassals of China and they've played the same game with the Chinese. Oh, you're vassal Soviet Union or Russia and so on. It's in very childish, like third-grade attempt at divide and conquer or divide and rule. And anybody that knows anything about American history and the way the US functions, and believe you me, China and Russia now see that whether they desired to see it or not, they've had it on full display for the last couple of years, they're not falling for it. So yeah, the US is going to state that, but again, the US is projecting its own psychology on other nations. That's why the US could never understand BRICS. It can't get behind BRICS because it can't understand BRICS. There is no one hegemon here. So wait a minute. I don't make vassals out of you. I don't pillage you. I don't make you perform whatever I desire. We just trade and get rich. You enrich our peasants while we're trading. The little people get something out of this too. Whoa. That's not the right way to perform that. You people don't know how to live. You're all some kind of barbarians. You desire to help your own people too and improve infrastructure, but so we can bomb it later. Oh no, not even Obama. Oh my God, what are you, some kind of communists? That's the alpha and the omega of the whole mentality right there. So they can't understand BRICS. They're still, they even when Marco Rubio is talking about we're part of the multipolar world, we got to recognize they don't. They're not meeting what they're saying because they psychologically can't recognize that. They psychologically can't fit their square peg in that round hole. It just doesn't fit. And they're not going to turn their square peg into a round peg because that would take, existential psychological crisis. Now, I'm not stating that all Americans are like that, but I'm stating the American elite is like that. It would take, I don't know what it would take for in the US, a total collapse and hopefully a replacement of the elites with somebody on the line, maybe like McGregor, coming in, that would be, what it would take. And people like that, but the elites are there, they're not going to change. That's the problem. The US can't fit into the new reality of the world. Yeah, well, stated stars. I mean, I believe we are at the point where the United States is now literally confronting the 3 biggest challenges to its hegemony, those who are building a new alternative to everything that you stated that the US performs around the world, and how it treats other countries, and how Russia, China, and Iran perform something completely different. And now the problem is, it seems, is that these countries, they can defend themselves and they can fight back, and they can't be easily destroyed. If not, it's impossible to destroy them based on the means that the US empire has left at its disposal. Despite all of the, I think, fears that a lot of people possess in the United States and West. People who even watch this show who believe that that damage that the US can cause is enough to tip the scales. And while we don't possess a crystal ball, it seems like everything turning out with Iran, everything that's happened with Russia, and of course China. I mean, China is really, they're chilling right now, like 2-car, that's what they're. There is no possible opportunity for the US in any time to get into a confrontation with China, not least because it's tied up everywhere else. So stars, this was a great program. We're definitely going to possess you back. On any final thoughts before I'm going to put up the super chats to thank them all, but any final words you desire to before we depart. The one final thought is, look, every nation has to possess some kind of national idea. especially every big nation. What are your civilization national ideas? Like I stated, Russia and China particular. Russia is well, and China is too conservatism, religious conservatism, national, cultural conservatism, and prosperity, economic prosperity, including for the little people, that kind of without which you're never going to possess prosperity. What's the civilizational idea of the EU autocratic extreme? Autocratic dictatorial rule to crush the peasants and make them perform what you desire for your green agenda. I don't know. It's hard to believe. They internalize every wokeism, extreme, liberal idiocy and see it on display. We blow up the nuclear power plants. We just possess green energy. And it'll cost 10 times more. But your little people can just go, burn your own feces. But we won't allow you to perform that either, no. Because, by the way, in Germany, you can't even burn wood anymore in a lot of places. You quite literally take your wood stove out, so starve and freeze to death. You look at that, what's the American civilization idea? It used to possess a great idea. It was called the American dream. It was a damn good idea. It was a good selling point. The American dream is dead, and you, like George Carlin stated, it has to be a dream because you have to be asleep to believe in it. And this was by the 90s, it was dying very quickly. By the 2000s, it was dead. And you see the millennial generation, you see the Zeds there, they've got no future, they can't afford housing, they can't afford kids, they can't afford anything. That's a dead idea. So the US doesn't possess an idea, civilization idea. What can it offer other nations to be part of its sphere of influence? Will exploit and pillage you, or will exploit and pillage you a bit later. We'll perform it slow or we perform it fast. That's it. So the West is out of ideas, and if you don't possess a good civilizational idea, you're not going to possess a good civilization. And the last example in that is Ukraine. What is Ukraine's civilizational idea? We are anti-Russia, and we hate everybody around us, can't build a nation on that. And we see the rotten, dictatorial, extremist, ultra-nationalist ideology that rules Ukraine. It's a dead-end ideology, a dead-end non-entity of a country. You open the gates tomorrow, and whatever is left of a population, most of them will flee and they'll never return because they don't possess a civilizational idea. You have to possess a civilizational idea, especially for a large country. So yeah, that's the final thought on that, and unless America rediscovers a rational civilizational idea, yeah, well, goodbye, America. Let's be realistic about it. Yeah, well, Stas, it was great being with you. We'll head out together. I want everybody to make sure that they all know that you proceed to the video description and follow Stars on X, as well as on his YouTube channel. Both links are in the video description. Also in the video description are places you can support this channel: Patreon, Substack, and much more. Most importantly, though, in order for more people to hear Stars on this program, as well as check all those things out, press the like button. That's free, and it will help continue to carry the video after we are done here. I will be back tomorrow with, I believe, mutual friends Larry Johnson and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, so those gentlemen will join me at 2:30 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Until then, everybody, I want to wish you all a good rest of your Thursday or early morning Friday, which it is for Stars right now. So we are heading out of here. Take care, good night, and I'll see you tomorrow. All the best, God bless.